Hello and welcome to the Car Carnot Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2023 Hyundai Santa Cruz. Is it a truck? Is it an SUV? Is it a real truck? Is it not a real truck? Many things can be said about this thing, and we're going to start a review by saying this is actually a modified Hyundai Tucson into a thing with a bed. A lot of things are good, a lot of things are not good, and the truck folks don't tend to like this thing because it's not a real truck. But there is actually a point to this where this starts to make a lot of sense, as you'll find out in this video right after this. Let's start our technical review of the Santa Cruz under the hood. Now, depending what trim you get in this car, you would have two completely different powertrains to a point. First, let's start with the engines. There is a 2.5-liter four-cylinder turbo, and then there is a 2.5-liter four-cylinder non-turbo. They're basically the same engine. One of them is turbocharged, one of them is not. They share a lot of the same technology. So let's first start with the engines and talk about the similar stuff. Now, this engine has dual injection system. So you have port injectors and direct injectors at the same time. They work either or. And this is something very good. Finally, we have that in Hyundais, and that means no more carbon buildup. That is very good, so you can have kind of best of both worlds. Now, something else about this engine, it has a very clever variable valve timing, especially on the intake. Similar to that of Toyota and Mazda, they've been using a similar system. Now, Hyundai also has that in this engine. It is basically an electronic motor that spins the speed of the camshaft. When you want to advance the timing, that motor will speed up and the cam gear will turn internally, and that speeds up, advances the timing. When you want to retard the timing, that motor slows down relative to the speed of the camshaft. And now the VVTi gear internally turns and retards the timing. When they spin the same speed, you're at base timing. Very simple operation, and people will say this is a very complicated system. It actually is not, because you don't have oil control. Oil, you're trying to control something mechanical with oil is always more to it than just a motor that spins, basically direct connection to the mechanical component with an electronic motor. Now, this does not actually make things more complicated. Servicing this motor is pretty simple. However, unlike Toyota and Mazda, this does require a special tool to install it. Not really a very fancy or high-end, expensive special tool, but nonetheless, it does require a special tool. Unlike Mazda and Toyota, where it's just bolt-on calibration and then we're good. Now, on the exhaust side of things, things are oil-controlled. Very, very basic. Little solenoid pushes the oil control valve. This is a design we've seen in a lot of auto manufacturers. It's a very simple design, works really good. Now, this engine does have EGR. People usually don't like EGR because EGR equals problems. And the only complaint I have about this EGR system is where it's located. See, most EGR valves are in the front, easily accessible, not on this engine, and worse in the turbo model. It literally sits right underneath the exhaust manifold. All the cooler, the valve, the piping, it all sits in the back. That's the only thing that is not good about it, is the location of the EGR system. Now, this engine mechanically, let's talk about the timing chain. It has two timing chains. One of them is for the cams to the crankshaft. The second timing chain goes from the crank, and it's kind of shared with the oil pump and the balance shaft. Balance shaft sits all the way at the bottom. One small thing about the balance shaft, if we had the balance shaft all the way at the bottom of the engine, why couldn't we just gear mesh it, make life easier? They didn't, and that's kind of the thing. So now your balance shaft is chain driven. One more thing that is chain driven, right? Another thing about this engine is it has an oil cooler, even in a non-turbo trim. That is pretty cool to find in a small four-cylinder engine. Usually that's reserved for like a high power V6 or something. This has an oil cooler for a car that is not really performance oriented. Another thing about this engine is it has a vacuum pump. When the direct injectors are operating, vacuum will drop, and it has a very oddly shaped vacuum pump. It's right here. Usually vacuum pumps are buried somewhere in the engine bay and really hard to get to. This one sits right there, very nicely accessible and Nice location, Hyundai. I guess that makes up for the EGR location. The cooling system in these engines, they're pretty basic. External mechanical water pump sits all the way in the back. Hyundai's been doing that, putting a water pump all the way in the back. I don't get it, but that's what they do. At least the alternator is in the front. And it does have a coolant distribution valve, so it prioritizes where the coolant goes. If the engine is cold, we're not going to send too much coolant to the engine to warm it up. And the lot, this is very standard stuff in modern gasoline engines. Works pretty good. I like the fact that this water pump is just sitting there. It's belt driven. It's not chain driven like some manufacturers. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Now, on the model that has no turbo, on the kind of the lower trims, the transmission that is mated to the non-turbo 2.5 is a conventional torque converter style 8-speed transmission. Works pretty good. There's nothing really that can go wrong with old school transmission. It does have too many gears for a small engine that doesn't really make a lot of power, but there's no frenzy going on around it. Just conventional 8-speed transmission. Now, let's switch back to the turbo engine. And this happens to be that turbo engine. This is a higher trim press cars that are trying to impress us with their better drivetrain, although we'll see about that in a bit. So the turbocharger, it is oil and coolant cooled, sits all the way in the back. It is a medium-sized turbo. I don't like turbos that sit in the back. I think so far, the cars that we've reviewed, only Honda has had them in the front, where they're right there, easy access. Because the intake manifold, you're not going to be doing much with it. But the turbo being in the front, might want to replace a coolant line, oil line, whatnot. This one is in the back. And there is a few things about it. And this is where technology kind of doesn't match up. So you have an electronically controlled wastegate and air-to-air intercooler. I don't think that is the best combination. I wish it was the other way around. I wish we had vacuum-controlled wastegate. Very simple, doesn't really have a lot to go wrong with it. And liquid-to-air intercooler. But that's not the case here. Nothing's perfect. That's what we have. But when I say nothing is perfect, it really starts to be not perfect when we talk about the transmission that is mated to the turbo model, which is our favorite from Hyundai. DCT transmission, the I will self-destruct in time transmission. I don't know why Hyundai insists on the DCT. I mean, I'd rather see a CVT than a DCT. Not because the DCT, which by the way stands for dual clutch transmission, basically when you're in first gear, second gear is already engaged. It's essentially a manual transmission, two manual transmissions connected together with a wet clutch, kind of a heavier duty clutch that is electronically engaged. It is great on paper. It is great on some hot supercar that is never driven on the street, only on the track. But when you put it in an everyday car, there's so many compromises. It is a fragile thing. That's the problem with the DCT. Every single manufacturer that have put a DCT in an everyday car have had issues because they're not meant for this. Every time you're in a traffic jam, not only will it jar you, shake, and do all this crazy stuff, you're actually eating away at it slowly. So I don't know why Hyundai keeps going with the DCT, but yes, the higher trim. Not only do you have a turbo to worry about, now you have a DCT to worry about as well. Let's take a look underneath the Hyundai Santa Cruz. And the first thing you notice, the front section is well covered. You have your simple oil service access right here, but the rest of it is not very covered up. I mean, we have basically the body is right here, and that's not very good, but this thing is sufficiently quiet to drive, so I suppose that's not an issue. There is some cheapness around going on here. Let's look at that. First one is this little shield that is basically the cheapest insulation you can find. I mean, I wish to see a little better heat insulation, and there's nothing anywhere else. That's just what they went with. And then the exhaust right here looks so cheap. I mean, this is super single wall, not double wall. Very cheapo looking and feeling. Not the end of the world. Again, we keep saying that like we're making excuses, but this doesn't look good. Let's put it that way. Let's look at the front suspension and brakes. And starting with something interesting. This is a pretty large truck. We're going to call it that a little bit. Don't get offended if you're a real truck owner. This is a single piston caliper. Pretty small one, actually. The brakes are very small in this. They are pretty confidence inspiring for my drive, but they are small. Aluminum knuckle. I like that this control arm is separate from the ball joint for serviceability. This is a very good design. Plastic internally. Sway bar links, which is not ideal. McPherson strut, and the whole 9 yards is pretty similar to basically almost every single front-wheel drive designed car. As we move our way back, drive shaft, and if we turn around and look up in this area, we can see basically everything, because this is a pretty high platform. You can see your transfer case right there connected to transmission. You can see the bottom part of the turbo, or where that catalytic converter is, pretty tucked away up there. That is actually nice for theft and all that, but it's pretty open in this area. You see the drive shaft coming out, going to the back. It's a pretty wide open area. I suppose for serviceability it's nice, but it's too open. There's almost zero insulation here. Then as we move our way back, more exposed body and everything, and another cheap looking muffler here. That's just how they do things. We move to the rear differential, which does have this massive behemoth right here with a motor that locks the front and rear differential together and all that with a button. But the differential itself is tiny. I mean, this is a very small differential. Actually, the unit that hooks to it is almost as big as it. That's interesting in a truck when we're trying to do the truck. Rear suspension is a multi-link suspension. It works, although I am very leery about this little plastic cover. I don't know what it does. Behind it is a metal piece though, so there is that. Aluminum knuckle in the rear as well. The brakes here are also single piston caliper, and it does have the electronic motor to engage the parking brake. I like these, I think they're better. But one thing that is interesting, we have possibly one of the bigger shocks that I've ever seen in a car. I mean, look at this massive behemoth right here. This is a very, very large shock. I mean, I don't think even real trucks, heavy duty, have a shock this big, but Hyundai decided to put an enormous shock like that. This thing has another muffler here, which is also a little cheap looking, but nonetheless, it has two mufflers. It's pretty quiet. This is not really meant for, not a high performance car in any way, shape, or form. We do have a beautiful spare tire that is underneath it. I think this is a good place for it. They gave you that storage in the bed. Now you have the spare tire underneath. It is a small spare tire. I think they could have fit a full-size spare tire here. That would have been nice, but hey, we have some spare tires, so that's good. Let's take a look at the exterior of the Hyundai Santa Cruz. And the first thing you look at the front is, it looks like a Tucson. It's actually very identical to a Tucson with a few changes. We still have the same low headlights that get filled with snow, and if your area is snowy, but that's what they did. We also have the integrated daytime running lights in the grille. I think those look pretty cool and a pretty nice design. Now, when we go around the side of the Santa Cruz, that's when things kind of depart from the Tucson. You remember the Tucson on the door had all kinds of crazy turns and a bubble and all that. This doesn't have any of that. It actually has one crease that kind of splits into a Y, and then it just subtly disappears. I really like this. It just gives it a break from the bland look that usually trucks have. I think that is pretty cool. But what is completely kind of back to the madness of the Tucson is this situation right here of the fender arch. So you notice with the hump, and more importantly, the little silhouette of a truck on it. So here is what's going on here. This is a limited model that is fully loaded, has every single bell and whistle, but you need to pay $500 more to have a different fender arch that has a little door that opens so you can hook up your GoPro. to record your off-roading, rock climbing events in your non-body-on-frame truck with 20-inch wheels. I don't know what they were thinking there, and this looks so odd. I mean, we couldn't make the mount at the bottom, make this flat. Would have looked so much better. But even better than that is the giant gap that we have right here that is not very confidence-inspiring for quality, but that's what we have. Then we make our way to the back, to the bed, to the most important thing. But of course, we have to pass by one of these again because they're in all four corners. Before we open the bed and talk about it, let's look at these taillights. I actually like these taillights. They're kind of a departure from the normal norm of the automotive industry with all bar lights. Every car almost looks the same. I like these taillights. I like how they come into the bed and they just stop. And they're kind of unique to this. You cannot mistake this for anything else. And of course, you can't mistake this for anything else because we have Santa Cruz kind of stamped onto the sheet metal of the bed door. It does look cool. Every single truck has this now. It's kind of a fashion in the truck world, and it is a fashion that made it to the Santa Cruz as well. We look in the bed, which is, of course, soft open. I like that. I think it's pretty cool. One thing have to be said about this bed door. It is proper, folks. The hinges are from a truck. The kind of the hydraulic mechanism that lowers it. Everything here, this looks like a proper truck bed. Got your little cup holders here. Everything is lined. But what is not very nice about this bed is this tonneau cover, which is optional. It's only in the higher trims. It has one small problem. Very simple to open. It's open. It does have a little strap so you can pull it back. But when you look at this giant mechanism here that houses it, it takes so much space out of this very small bed to begin with. It just makes absolutely no sense. I don't know why they did that. I don't encourage you to buy one with this because this doesn't make sense. Because there is actually a place here that is super cool, kind of similar to the Ridgeline. You have your own lockable storage area right here. Folks, this is super cool because A, it's lockable, B, it is weatherproof. You see the weather seal right here? So you can leave your valuables here if you do not have a tonneau cover, lock them, and have them be protected from elements. And of course, because of federal regulations, you have the little escape hatch. Not that you can fit anybody in here, but just in case. Another thing about this area is it has a water drain. I see this actually being used as a cooler in a trip or something. It actually works out. Got a little drain on the side there. Looks pretty cool. I like it. This is super cool to find on a truck like this. Similarly on the Ridgeline. We do have some bed lights, two on the side, one up there. We also have a little storage compartment here with a power outlet. I think this is pretty cool. They thought of this. This is where you want that power outlet to be. Also hidden away. And you also have a C channel here with some clamps, and everything is truck-like here. Very small bed, but I like it. It works. It has a lot of features, and they really thought about this very well. Didn't just cut a Tucson and made a little opening. Let's talk about the interior of the Santa Cruz. And initially, when you look at this, it looks exactly the same as the Tucson. But the one thing we said about the Tucson when we reviewed it, the interior materials and kind of the fit and finish felt generic, felt cheap. This one, even though it's exactly the same interior, feels a lot better. And I like the materials here. Everything feels right. Everything fits right. I like it. It's actually the interior in this where things really look good. And the driving position, where you sit relative to the dash, is different than the Tucson. Here, this is where this interior, in my opinion, really comes to play the part. Your seating position is very good. The seats are extremely comfortable, and the dash being flat, doesn't really have any humps for the gauges, makes this a very comfortable car to drive, a very comfortable car to sit in. And surprisingly, the noise levels here are not very high, and this is kind of a surprise. Usually Hyundais, they're not the quietest. They have Genesis for that and all that, but this one, even on highway, it's actually surprisingly good. Now, the rest of this interior is typical modern Hyundai. You have a useless screen for the gauge and the higher trims, and this screen does nothing. It's just a screen to raise the price of the car, and it absolutely accomplishes nothing. The only thing it does that is kind of nice, but it's getting old, is when you turn the turn signal, you can see your blind spot displayed in your screen. That's really the only thing about the gauge screen that is different than the normal one with mechanical gauges. Center stack, there is a lot of piano black, and that's not an issue. Yes, they get dirty and all that. Just keep your car clean and you're good. But what is not nice is basically every single button here is touch capacitive. I don't like the touch capacitive stuff because if you're wearing gloves, it's too cold, can't operate them, you need to take them off, do all this. It just, physical button would have been better. I know they're trying to go with this swooping design where there's no button, but this is not exactly a show car. We need physical buttons. Where we do make some of that up is with the physical shifter. I like that this is an actual physical shifter. And the buttons for your heated and cooled seats are physical buttons. They're also piano black. They'll get dirty. Just clean your car, you'll be fine. This is a very nice place to be. Even though it looks exactly like a Tucson, it is not exactly the same. I like this interior, don't like the gauges, but that's not the end of the world. Let's talk about the back seat of the Hyundai Santa Cruz. This is where there is a small compromise. And when I say small, I mean a big compromise. Because they had to put the bed in the back, they actually made this smaller. I mean, you look at this thing from the outside, it's huge. But here, it's pretty cramped. I mean, this is my driving position. If I sit here, I'm going to have a hard time sitting here because this is very small space. That's the first problem. The second problem is, where is my center armrest? It doesn't exist. There is no armrest in the rear seat. Not the end of the world. That's okay. But on the nice side, you do have some vents here. So at least when you're cramped here, you can have some AC on your face, which is nice. You have two full-size USB ports. That is also nice. But then, because this is a truck, or trying to be like a truck, we have some more goodies. We can actually pull the seats up, which is pretty nice. Same thing for that seat. You have your jack here and your tools. Just like a real truck, you can fold this up. I guess that is nice, but then the jack takes all the rest of the space, so, you know, they tried. But one more thing I will talk about in this, and this is where they're really trying to push that truck thing. We have a tiny little window that opens here in the back, just like a truck, so you can get some airflow in here. It is manual, not power, which is fine. But yeah, there is that. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the Hyundai Santa Cruz. And it starts with the DCT transmission in the higher trims, like this Limited right here. Now, they market this as an adventure vehicle, one that you're going to take to the wilderness and enjoy the outdoors with your equipment and everything you can put in the bed and everything. I'm sorry. Wilderness, off-roading, light off-roading in a DCT transmission, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. I don't think they thought this through very, very well. But to be fair, I see the point of this truck, and it's actually a pretty good one. And yes, I did call it a truck right now. Sorry, real truck owners, because this is not a real truck. But that's intentional. They never marketed or thought that this will be a real workhorse that will carry your payloads and pull giant thing. That was not the intent. It could do some of those things, but that was not the intent. The problem is the whole package, or actually the trims, is what I don't like about this. See, you go into this is a limited trim that has every single bell and whistle. You have a DCT, you have a turbo engine. I like the engine because it makes more power. It's actually a pretty powerful engine. But the DCT, we go again, doesn't work right because you have no option of either. You're stuck, basically, if you want the nice one, you're stuck with the DCT. But it goes further than that, to the biggest elephant in the room with this thing. $41,000 gets you in one of these. I'm sorry, at that point, you are in territory of, actually deep into the territory of the likes of the Toyota Tacoma, the Nissan Frontier, the Chevy Colorado, the Ford Ranger, which are all real trucks that also got modernized, that also have nice amenities, but they are also real trucks. You can do towing with, you can really push them to the limit because they have a body on frame. So this is where my problem is, the higher trim. It just doesn't make sense. And it goes so much more than that. For example, if the thing with the GoPro mounts that we talked about in the exterior review, that's an additional option even on the higher trim. So now you're paying $500 more to get something so gimmicky it doesn't even make sense. This is the problem. They had no clear objective of what this truck is supposed to do. And don't get me wrong, there is actually a use for this that makes total sense, which we're going to talk about in the next section of this video. So what is the final verdict on the Hyundai Santa Cruz? Folks, this thing is a little bit confused as to exactly what it is and who's the target buyer is. And here is my take on that, just my humble opinion. The buyer for this car, or someone who would really appreciate this and want something like this, is not really the typical truck owner, too proud to have, they want their real frame and all that, and their truck buddies, they need to show off that bigger frame and bigger front diff and all that stuff. This is for that homeowner or family person that they will need to carry stuff occasionally, some home renovation, small project. They want to save on that delivery fee for that new fridge they just bought that you don't want to put in your SUV and tear up the headliner and the interior and everything. And then occasionally you go some mountain biking or something and all your bike is full of mud and dirt and you don't want to put it inside your SUV and mud all over the place. Well, this bed you can just wash it off with a hose and life is good. But wait, you will say, why do those people don't just buy a real truck and be done with it? Yes, folks, I like real trucks, but I have to say one thing. They usually don't get good gas mileage. They're usually rough riding, and there's a lot more maintenance to them. They don't drive like a car. They don't drive like a body on frame. And secretly, every truck owner or truck-like owner, even SUVs, secretly wishes, couldn't they just ride like a normal SUV on the days that you are not doing truck-like activities? Well, case in point is here. Not everybody needs a real truck, but some people need a bed. And this is what this thing does very well, because when those 1 or 2 or 3 or 7 occasions that you will need the bed are over, this is a very comfortable car. Gets good gas mileage, smooth, refined, drives like an SUV. This is the point of this. So yes, I do see a point of this. And this one, I think, is actually nicer than the Maverick, because the Maverick is the Ford Maverick, by the way. The Ford Maverick, even though it is kind of more on the truck side, it's still not a real truck, doesn't have a frame, and it rides like a truck. It behaves like a truck. This doesn't behave like a truck. It does have some truck features, but it doesn't behave like a truck. And that's where this starts to make sense. But it makes even more sense at the lower trims. In the higher trims, you're stuck with a DCT transmission, turbo engine, which in my opinion, the lower trims with the non-turbo engine and the conventional 8-speed transmission will have the edge on reliability. They're cheaper, and they still have everything that this have. Maybe not the fancy gauge screen and everything, but I think they make more sense because there is a need for a truck like this that is not really a truck. It's just an SUV with a bed. Makes sense. I like it. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.